My name is Sarah McLeod Berling. I was actually born in Hartford, Connecticut. Well, there was two daughters. I'm the second, the younger, and my dad was a coach at the Trinity College in Hartford when we were born, and mom was a housewife. And then we moved with the Navy after Pearl Harbor to Carmel, which was not a bad assignment. My father immediately joined the Navy, and there was a 6-week quickie class at the Annapolis to develop officers, because it was a big hurry to get going. So then we drove out from, he was stationed at, he was one of the first officers at what is now the Navy Postgraduate School, but it's when the Navy took over from the Del Monte Hotel. And he found us a place to rent in Carmel. I might add, for $65 a month, and it never went up for 16 years. The atmosphere at Carmel was a very nice, small town, friendly atmosphere. People watched out for each other's kids. I can remember there was a 10-cent store down the street, and I can remember thinking I really wanted a little car. I was a tomboy, and I wanted a little car. And I did think about taking it, and then I thought, no, somebody's going to see me and tell Mom I wouldn't dare. So it wasn't like, oh, it's bad to steal. It was much more that I was going to be caught. And so it was an extremely safe, we felt safe. We never locked the doors. We walked all around at night. If we wanted to go down to the library from Santa Rita, that was no one questioned it. I walked home from school when I was in kindergarten, which of course now they're very careful about. But it was a whole different time. And the other aspect of it is I think we were all lower to middle class. Everybody lived here full time, which was a real difference than now. And there wasn't a kind of wealthy group that, if they were there, it wasn't very obvious. Carmel was a fabulous place to grow up. It couldn't be more beautiful, and the weather lends itself to being outside. I like the outdoors, so there's very few days when you can't get outside and do something. And the people, I think we knew each other's parents. If you were going to play with them, you just walked a few blocks and had somebody to play with. I think most people were very helpful, watched each other's children to make sure things were going well. On our street, down about 3 houses, no, I guess it was just 2 houses down, there was an older lady who was in her 70s, and of course I thought she was ancient, but she was a delightful person, and she used to come over and, she would share ideas of life and so on, and she was kind of philosophical. I think Carmel couldn't, in those days, couldn't have been a safer, more pleasant place to grow up. Good schools, nice library. Well, as far as the natural environment of Carmel, of course, I didn't realize when I was young at how beautiful it was. I thought the whole world might be that way. And we used to walk down Ocean Avenue, cross the beach, and walk over to learn tennis at the beach club. And John Gardner was the young pro then. And, that was like no big deal. It was a long walk, but of course we were kids and it was easy to do. And no idea that this was, what an exceptional place it was. But for, as I said earlier, for people who like the outdoors, it was a perfect spot. I think the trees were a lot lower then. There were more views of the ocean. I happen to like views of the ocean, so I'm not one of, I think we could do with fewer trees. But the variety, we could parents would drop us at different places. We could go out the valley and play in the river, and they'd come back and get us at a certain time. So there was all sorts of things really to do that was really special. My father, he got his master's at Columbia University, and I think it was in physical education. And so he coached first. When he came to San Francisco City College, he did teach some sociology, but he was a representative for the foreign students, and maybe their mentor. I don't know exactly what his position was called. So he stayed at that job a long time and liked it very much. He would be good at it.
And your mother, was she a housewife?
No, she, let's see, I was 10, so it would have been 1947. She started a store, which was girls and teens clothes and for small women. And it was eventually the biggest store on Ocean. She did really well. She was known to really cater to what you wanted, listen carefully. People would call, say, I'm going to bring my daughter in, and Mom would have several things all arranged in the dressing room for them. And people still comment on it to me about how good she was, and the people who worked for her, with good contact with the customer. If you're on the south side of Ocean, and you would start coming down, so when we would walk down the hill, and I would skip down the hill, and Sue, my good older sister, would say, "Don't be silly, you look foolish." But skipping downhill is really fun because you get a lot of momentum going. Anyway, at first there would be the lumber yard, and then you'd have the theater, the old Carmel Theater, and then Blewett's was next door. It was a creamery. No, that was Pilots that was next door. Then if you get on, so you're past Mission, you're between Mission and San Carlos, there were a lot of little shops there, and you got to Blewett's, which was the creamery that most of us went to, which was next door to a Standard station. And then you're at the next corner, so that would be San Carlos and Ocean, and there was Fortier's drugstore, which was a really nice store, and they had, their home was up almost to the highway, and they could still see the ocean. It was a whole different thing then. It's totally obliterated now because I know the person lives in the house. But after that, there was a shoe store and a few things like that. When you got to Dolores, if you went south on Dolores from Ocean, my mom's first store was on the west side of the street, and next door was a stamp shop, stamp and coin shop, and shoe store down from it. And across the street was the Tuck Box. It was a little further down on Dolores, and we could go in the evening and pay for it, but pick up what dessert they hadn't sold, which was fabulous, of course. On the other side of Ocean, if we're taking the north side, so at one point there was Betty Green's stable that was there, and she was something to see in her very unsophisticated, dirty shirt way. And then the park, of course, was there early. And then there was a 10-cent store and a bakery, and the Putnam and Raget's was a dry goods store. And eventually Mom was next door to Putnam and Raget's and had the whole corner where Coach is now, and went back to 6th Street. And so then there was Kip's Market. We're now at the corner of San Carlos and Ocean. Kip's Market, and they had peanuts in a thing where you could just dish them in, but the Jays would come and get the peanuts and go. That was fun to watch. The next store was the Village Hardware where I worked, and it had this big scale, and there now is a picture of it in a cartoon of Bill Bates at the local post office. Both the men and the women would come. We didn't have home scales. And so they would come and they'd put their penny in, but first they would take everything out of their pockets, of course, or the woman would be sure her purse was down there. And then the Carmel Drug was next door, and eventually there was some little small stores, and then at the far corner was the Bank of Carmel. And then, you know, on down, I don't remember too much of what's past that. The Village Corner is where it is now on 6th and Dolores. We used to sell pine cones. You could sell pine cones for 10 cents a piece, and you got to keep a nickel. That was a big deal. That was a toy. By that time, we were teenagers, though. And the post office was just down from the Village Corner, a couple buildings down. Yeah. Rinky Dinks, the fire station was up a ways on 6th, and Rinky Dinks was the little hamburger place, was right across the street, it was mostly males who went there. They got a big kick out of it. So. We lived back to back with the Neal family, and they owned Neal Engineering, which still is working with the city, but they also owned what was the Village Hardware, which was right next to where Carmel Drug still is now. Those 3 buildings there were some of the earliest buildings built. Devendorf and Powers had those 3 buildings that are all attached, built in 1905. You probably know this already, Katie. And they owned the Village Hardware. I'll get back to where I was going to go. Mom and Mrs. Neal were friends. Our lots were back to back. And so we were at dinner when I was 15, Mom, me, and Mrs. Neal. And something came up about working, and I said, well, this was my first job interview, the place I would most like to work is the Village Hardware. And she said, when do you want to begin? So that was a very easy first job interview, wasn't it? It was a fascinating hardware store because it had all the traditional hardware items, the tools, the paint, the nails, and all that. But those were the days when the nails were in boxes, and someone, a builder would come in and say, I want 20 nails of this sort and 20 of these and so on, and you just would count them out, and they were kept up above. It had a rolling ladder that on both sides, so it went, the ceiling was maybe 12 feet high, I don't know how high, and you would just roll along and climb up and get what you needed and count them out. They did have housewares, and they had a wonderful collection of copper pots to cook with. And people would come down. It was a popular spot to get Christmas gifts for people from the Bay Area. But that was, that was interesting because, we didn't have tourists year round like now. The holidays they would really come to buy, whether it was that or Easter or whatever. But it was a fascinating hardware store. The Kite Festival was usually down at the beach, as I remember it. I think there was a sandcastle festival then too. I think they did sandcastle things. I'm not sure when that started, but I don't remember how we ran it. It was fun to play with the kites, and especially if they made them myself. At one point, I made one out of a stamp. I have to say, of course, it didn't fly, but people really made some good ones, but nothing like they have now. The commercially made ones that you can buy at the toy stores are so different. Ours were the typical shape, pretty much. The Bach Festival was here then, and the acoustics in the theater were very limited. If you got under the overhang, you weren't going to hear very much, and there were small seats for us kids, and of course they actually wanted to dampen the sound when they made the theater as an elementary school theater, so the change was great. But we had, sometimes we did 4th of July and sometimes not, and I know there was something about a Dutch thing, but that was before my time, so I don't know anything about that. I'm not sure what else we had. Halloween, oh, well, the pumpkins, of course. Yes, and I lived up on that hill where you put them down. I mean, I can't even imagine this one they have now because the police are there and everything. And of course, we snuck out. And if we thought the police were coming, then we stopped doing it and we ran someplace else. And we would start up at either Santa Rita or on up at Guadalupe, and you know, pumpkins don't roll very well. It's not like they are a ball, so you'd hope to get, it was really good if it went down a couple blocks, and then of course it splintered and went up. Yes, that was definitely fun. And we did the trick-or-treating too, and on my street, the two Jocelins lived. They were photographers from the early days, and Louis Jocelyn was right across the street from the Forest Theater, and he was a real grouch, and so, you know, we'd knock on his door and he would, you know. So, you know, we always had a little bit of soap, and you'd put a little soap on the window. When I was about 11, several of us wanted to ride horseback out Pebble Beach, and it was going to be $1.50 for an hour of horseback riding. And so I wrote up a little thing from my parents on how I could earn $1.50 a week so that I could pay for the horseback. And there was several of us, 6 or 7 of us, who all did that together. And during those days, the Monterey County Fair also had a horse show, and we could ride in the horse show and stuff. That was really fun. Living near the Forest Theater, if I could hear them playing, I would finish homework and walk down, and there's a path behind the Forest Theater, and you know, you can stand and watch through the fence and watch anything you want, and you know, I mean, they wouldn't care that we were there, and it was fun. I did that frequently. You know. I had a crush on the guy who played the captain in what's the Gilbert and Sullivan, HMS Pinafore. Yeah. We thought music like that was normal, and that, you know, you could go hear the practices, and if you're walking on Mission, you can still hear them practicing. The artists, you know, fantastic artists, and you know, we'd look at them and think it was neat, but I don't think we knew who was who. It's fun living in a town and growing up in a town when there's so much variety. And there wasn't, you know, like when I lived in Firebaugh for a short time, it's such a difference. And even up around the Bay Area, you know, they'd be much bigger. We were so concentrated here and had so much that was really interesting. Great education for kids. Carmel during the war was very interesting because there was blackouts. We were right, you know, being on the coast, they didn't want our evening lights to show, and they'd have little guys walk around reminding people if they hadn't pulled their black curtains down. Gas was an issue, so it was rationed, and you know, the doctors were all in Monterey, and so it was an issue what you were going to decide to do that was outside. You could walk all over Carmel, so you know, that wasn't a problem there. And you know, I think one of the interesting things about World War II was that people were really behind it. People were very patriotic, as opposed to Vietnam and our more recent wars. So there was a good feeling about it. Naturally, it was scary, and of course you saw the newsreels. You didn't have television. None of us had television then, but we'd see the newsreels. The 17-mile drive was closed, and they had gunneries out there, and there's still signs of them, actually. So, you know, we were fortified in a way compared to what we are now. I was thinking about the most memorable event, and I think actually VJ Day was the most memorable event for me. When we ended the war with Japan, the people were hawking in the streets, and you know, I don't think I understood all about it, but it was, I would have been 8. It was very exciting. It was very positive. People were super happy and relieved, of course, and it just was a big, huge celebration. That's, you know, a lot of the Leidig family, the Ricketts family, these people were all very conscientious, and kind of non-controversial. It wasn't like there were big issues, I don't think, but they kept Carmel going very well. Naturally, there was always an issue of how much do you attract tourists, because it changes our way of life. On the other hand, we need their money. I mean, that's still an issue now. But I think there was lots of people who, you know, if I thought about it a while, I could name them. But I think they belonged to a string of people who watched over Carmel in a pretty responsible way. So one interest I really have in Carmel is its history, because I was a history major in college, and I think it tells us a lot about us as people. A while ago, I met Jane Galante, and she's the granddaughter of Frank Devendorf, and you know, since Carmel was founded by Frank Devendorf and Frank Powers, she had a lot of very interesting material and wanted help getting it organized. She was in her early 80s, and she was quite aware that she, you know, wasn't going to live forever, like most of us are. And most of us are aware of it, not most of us are going to live forever. But so we worked on that, on the really good information. She had the minutes of the early meetings in San Francisco where they, you know, they were forming the ideas, and Devendorf, they would have letters from Devendorf suggesting, who lived here in Carmel, suggesting what he needed, and it was really very interesting. So when she died, just before that, and it's a good thing Sue was mayor, because Sue worked with her. So the library, Bancroft Library at University of California, wanted the collection, and she was willing to put it in a trust and have it housed at Carmel, and a lot of that had to do with Sue being mayor and working with her. But then the trust is run by the two Galante men, who are her sons, and I'm on the trust also. I think that it's really useful for people to learn more about Carmel's history, and you know, the place to do that is the library, the Carmel Library History Department or History Group, because I think people can really appreciate what a wonderful way it was started. It was started not as a subdivision, you know, not a developer who was making a subdivision that would just bring them money. They started right from the beginning with developing a school, a library, getting the basic livery stable, a grocery store, the basics, so it would be a nice community. And of course, I think it's so interesting that they wrote letters to, quote, brain people, unquote, to professors at Stanford and Cal, trying to get them to come down, and they did. The Golden Rectangle particularly were the area where they tended to settle and build houses. And right across the street from Sue is the Wilbur House, and the Wilbur was one of the presidents of Stanford University, actually. So he was very successful, and I think this has continued. It has attracted educated people. I think one of the greatest challenges for Carmel are getting a balance between what we need income to come in, and so we need things to draw visitors, and on the other hand, trying to keep it a comfortable place to live. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I'm very much for Car Week. I know a lot of people don't like Car Week. It does make it very busy, but you know, some of the things that come in and bring people are also exciting for those of us who live here. The two things that are main for Carmel are Concours on the Avenue on Tuesday, which is a fun, easygoing show of some really wonderful cars, some of the old ones from when I was young, 40s and 50s. And some would be the more fancy Porsches and other sort of cars. But it's friendly. People walk around with a big smile on their face. They visit with the people who own the cars, who are happy to go ahead and talk about anything. Then on Thursday, when they have the Concours d'Elegance cars, which is amazing that these people who own the cars, these cars, however much they might cost, and you know, scratching them. People walk back and forth, have their purses, their cameras, and so on. And you know, you'll see a guy kind of wiping off some fingerprints, but they're fabulous cars. I mean, the earliest possible cars, up to, you know, ones that there's only 5 left in the world and stuff. And you walk around and you can look at them, and you know, I don't know anything about engines. I just know if it looks pretty and interesting. So I think car week, but you know, the highway is crowded and there's people around. I think the biggest change is the fact that there's a significant percentage who aren't here full time. And it used to be that, you know, there were lights on in all the houses, and you knew your neighbors. I happen to live on a street, Franciscan Way, that has about 75% full time, so that is more positive than, say, the Golden Rectangle, which is, you know, not quite so many. So I think it makes a difference too, in that then there's not such a big connection with some of them. Depends how often they come. Naturally, it's more elaborate. The houses a lot of them are more elaborate. There aren't as many of the little houses. It's still a very nice place to live. I enjoy the people who are around to talk to. I mean, one of the issues about walking my dog for a short time is I've got to avoid people because everybody expects to have a little chat, and they're very interesting. You know, it's an intelligent group of neighbors and friends. Well, I think of my Carmel as a warm, friendly, beautiful place to live. I think the nature is unsurpassed. It's not necessarily the most beautiful place in the world, but it's one of them, I think. I think that the people, especially the ones who live here full-time or who kind of buy into Carmel when even if they're here part-time, they have a sense of Carmel, are very interesting, intelligent, friendly. So I see it as a place that's very stimulating, both in terms of nature and ideas. And I think it's a fabulous place to live.